I just wanted to start off with this topic of purity, right? Because this is what I have been asked to speak about. Um, I remember a while ago we had an event, me and a couple of friends of mine, where we just decided that we wanted to speak about purity and really debunk some of the myths, right, that we have around purity and around purity culture. So the first question we asked each other and the other women who came to the Zoom event is, what is purity? You know, when we think about purity, or when the word comes to mind, what is the first thing that automatically we think about? And for most of us, really, for some not, but for most of us, we realize that when we thought of the word purity, for some reason, the first thing that came to mind was that, okay, purity means that you're just not engaging in sexual activities, right, before marriage. Whether the sexual activity is just sex before marriage, or, you know, you trying to remain pure by not engaging in pornography or masturbation. But genuinely, it seems like there has been such an emphasis on sexual purity almost being the end all of Christian morality, right? So when we automatically think of purity, we think of sexual purity, and we've pretty much put it on this pedestal that this is what purity actually is, right? So there's an issue with this. And the issue is that as a body, since the beginning of time, we have somehow idolized this issue of sexual immorality. And we've made it seem like such an unforgivable or redeemable issue that we've even lost sight of what the word actually requires from us in totality. I believe that one way we can see this idolization is in how we equate sexual abstinence to purity itself. And I'm one of those people, right? For a long time, I actually equated my abstinence to purity. So it gets to a point where we ignore every other element that is truly required to make this journey of purity worthwhile. We fool ourselves into thinking that simply because we are not engaging in sexual activities, that automatically makes us pure. In fact, we see this happen so many times, even in the word, where women who are accused of adultery or being accused of being women of questionable backgrounds are brought to Jesus, right? And instead of Jesus condemning these women, he instead questions the motives and the hearts of those that are standing in judgment towards these women. So that is a perfect example of how, just like the men of old, we've done the very same thing. We have gone into this perception and this lie that abstinence means that I'm pure. But that's not the case. One thing that I have come to learn is that abstinence is a fruit of purity, and it is not purity itself. And I want to repeat that for us today. Abstinence or celibacy, or even sexual purity, whatever you want to call it, is not purity itself. Instead, it is a fruit of purity. In Psalms 119, verse 9 to 11, it reads, "How can a young man keep his way pure? By guarding it according to your word. With my whole heart I seek you. Let me not wander from your commandments. I have stored up your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you." In Hebrews 10, verse 22, it reads, "Let us approach God with a true and sincere heart, in unqualified assurance of faith, having had our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. So I want to take time today and just suggest to us that purity is an issue of the heart before it will ever be an issue of what you are doing with your body. I want to go further and say a change of heart is what enables us to keep pure, as the word says. I say this because as I said, I was once one of those people who believed that simply because I had managed to abstain for so long and practice self-control, it meant that I was good to go, In fact, I was even under the assumption that simply because I was abstaining for so long, it meant that I was completely delivered. It meant that my heart was pure. It meant that I shouldn't even struggle with any of these temptations that have to do with this thing, because look how much I've managed to remain pure, So in other words, I was pursuing and perfecting abstinence, and yet I had no regard to what is still brewing in my heart. And so many of us are like this. We have had years, of being in the world, years of trauma, years of perversion, years of ideals and perceptions that the world gave us. And we got out of that and we perfected abstinence, perfected sexual purity. And because of that, we thought, I'm good. And this is an issue that we find in the body simply because no one really speaks to us about the reality of this process. No one tells us that, hey, this doesn't actually just happen overnight. No one emphasizes how much of a multi-layered process sanctification actually is. Instead, we are told to pursue a journey focused on abstinence, yet this journey somehow lacks so much honesty. It lacks openness, it lacks intimacy, and most of all, it lacks humility. So we are convinced that as long as we can practice self-control and yet remain evasive and avoidant and full of pride, we are somehow walking in purity. And this is incredibly dangerous. Instead of focusing on the purification of our hearts so that our way can be kept in the Lord, we are just happy with keeping our hands clean. And I'm not even pointing fingers, I'm talking about myself, right? And the issue is that this practice that we have almost perfected in our communities has only perpetuated cycles of ignorance, has only perpetuated cycles of self-righteousness, and yet we still are so convinced that we are walking in purity. So just like the first point I made, that abstinence is a fruit of purity, and it is not purity itself, I want to make a second point for us today, and that is that there is absolutely no purity where there is pride or arrogance. There is absolutely no purity where there is pride or where there is arrogance. A lot of us are in seasons in our lives where we genuinely feel like we've made it, right? And I'm speaking from experience. You genuinely feel like, Lord, I'm so on fire for you. I have made it. I am pure. All because you've managed to remain celibate. And keep in mind, that is something that we should commend you for, right? But it's not good if you are just constantly making prayers in your heart, asking the Lord to cleanse your heart, to keep you from sin, to uproot all the sin out of your heart, and yet your heart remains empty. you're really asking him to fill it up with any goodness. You're really asking him to fill it up with kindness and mercy and love and gentleness and humility. So once again, we are okay with low-key being judgmental, low-key being stubborn, low-key sometimes disobedient to his voice and the instruction of the Holy Spirit. But as long as I'm not having sex, I'm okay. So in other words, we are pursuing purity, or we believe we are pursuing purity, but there is absolutely no humility in our hearts. And as I was just writing these notes, the Lord reminded me of a few of the points we had made at the Zoom call that we had, I believe, last year. And I realized that some of these points that we made were actually good examples for myself, right? On how at times I was walking or trying to pursue this purity journey, and yet there were no signs of humility in my life. And I want to just go through 3 examples for us today, just so we can see and reflect in our hearts and in our own personal time what it may look like for us to actually pursue purity without any humility. So the first example would be, if you believe that being a virgin or abstaining long enough makes you the preferred wife of choice. If you believe that being a virgin or abstaining long enough makes you a better Christian, or makes you a better woman of God, or even makes you a better leader. Now, the problem with this belief is that you are using your ability to abstain as a means to demean and judge the journeys of others. Already, that's an issue. A second way we may be trying to pursue purity without humility is if we believe that being a virgin or being celibate long enough, once again, determines your salvation or your spiritual maturity. See, the danger in using your virginity or your celibacy as a spiritual thermometer is that it breeds arrogance and judgment. In fact, what scares me about this is that it effectively makes sex an idol. Funny enough. Another issue is that it takes away from this amazing, beautiful message of grace that the Lord has given us. Instead, it feeds us this works-based religion, right? It tells us that, listen, in order to be saved or in order to be spiritually mature, there's just one rule you need to follow. And this one rule you need to follow is you need to, for example, be a virgin, and you're in. Very dangerous. And last but not least, is if you believe that remaining pure means that God owes you a marriage. So in this case, a lot of us, whether subconsciously or consciously, use our purity as a way to manipulate God. We use our virginity, our celibacy, as a way to manipulate God. There's absolutely no humility in that. So you feel like, Lord, the longer I wait, or depending on how well I wait, the more God owes you. And the problem with this is that the chances are that the longer you wait, the more you even grow angry towards God because you feel like you are owed. You've reduced your relationship to God to like a transactional thing, right? A transactional relationship. And so many of us women find ourselves there. That's why you're just hearing already in the air, so many women are tired of waiting. So many women are crying, Lord, where is this husband of mine, right? And so many of us are sincere, but others, you will find that we genuinely thought that if I wait long enough, if I wait well enough, and I remain pure, God owes me a marriage. And we know that God doesn't owe you a marriage. Instead, you remain pure out of honor and reverence to him. So I want to close off before I talk too long by saying that this should in no way scare us into feeling any kind of guilt or shame. If I read through these points and you relate, you find yourself in one of those points, because honestly, I feel like I find myself in all three of them. There are elements of me, and I believe elements of all of us in all three of these points, right? And that is okay. And I say that is okay because it's moments like this where the Lord actually takes these opportunities to call us deeper into him. When we are able to notice that, hold on, I'm not really doing this thing properly. I'm not really doing this thing the way you actually expect me to do it. This is the perfect time for the Lord to call us back deeper into him, for just a time of self-reflection, a time of deep, intense unpacking and healing. And I believe that is what the Lord is doing in this season, not only for me, but for so many of us. And what I love about moments like this is that when we are able to note our weakness, just like Kristen said, that Paul noted his weakness, that thorn in his flesh. It's when he noticed how weak he is, that is the minute the Lord began to comfort him even more thoroughly, love on him even more thoroughly, peel back those layers in Paul's heart that was actually holding him down. So it's like, it's these moments where we are on these journeys and we stop and we're like, wait, Lord, I feel like I've lost my way here. This is the perfect time for the Lord to love on you a little bit more. So yeah, I just want to call us into a time really, obviously in our own personal capacity, to allow the Lord to start just uprooting the pride, uprooting the self-righteousness, the stubbornness, the judgment. And I know even for me, the ignorance sometimes that comes with depending on our own strength and walking in arrogance and walking in pride and not completely leaning on the Lord for our strength. In fact, I believe that this is a time for the Lord to reveal his true nature to us. And hopefully, as he does this, we begin to pursue purity not only wholeheartedly, but even holistically, where it's not only our hands that are clean, but it's our hearts as well.